I didn't call him Grandpa growing up. Not really. That name came later, after my mom remarried and tried to stitch together something that looked like a normal family from the outside. Before that, he was just Richard, my mom's husband. The quiet man with a low voice, always sitting in the corner of the living room watching old westerns, barely speaking unless someone asked him something directly. I was 26 when everything fell apart. Old enough to know better, old enough to understand consequences, but also old enough to be completely exhausted by my own life, which is how I ended up back in that house in the first place. I had just left Chicago after a breakup that felt like it hollowed me out. 3 years with a guy who talked about marriage like it was inevitable, only to find out he'd been sleeping with his coworker for at least 6 months. I didn't scream, I didn't throw anything. I just packed a bag and drove straight through the night until the skyline disappeared behind me. My mom didn't ask many questions when I showed up. She hugged me, told me I could stay as long as I needed, and made up the guest room like I was still in college. Richard nodded at me from his recliner and said, "Good to have you back," in that same flat tone I remembered from years ago. The house hadn't changed much. Same beige walls, same heavy furniture, same faint smell of coffee and wood polish. It felt like stepping into a paused version of my life, like nothing had moved forward, except me, and even that felt questionable. The first week was quiet. I spent most of my time scrolling job listings, pretending I had a plan. My mom worked long shifts at the hospital, so it was usually just me and Richard during the day. We barely talked at first, just polite, surface-level exchanges. "You eat yet?" "Yeah." "Okay." That kind of thing. But slowly, something shifted. It started with small conversations. He'd ask about Chicago, about my job, about what happened with my ex. Not in a nosy way, more like he was genuinely trying to understand. One afternoon, I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my laptop without really seeing anything on the screen, and he came in and poured himself a cup of coffee. "You look like you're somewhere else," he said. "I wish I was," I muttered. He leaned against the counter. "Breakups will do that." I laughed, but it came out bitter. Yeah, especially when you find out the whole relationship was basically a lie. He didn't respond right away. Just took a slow sip of his coffee. "People are messy," he said finally. "They want things they shouldn't want. They lie to keep from losing what they already have." I remember looking up at him then, really looking. He wasn't what I would have called warm, but there was something steady about him, grounded, like he understood more than he let on. "Sounds like you've got experience with that," I said. He gave a small shrug. "Long life. You see things." That was the first real conversation we had, and after that, they started happening more often. It became a routine. My mom would leave for work early, and I'd wake up late, wander into the kitchen and find him already there. Coffee would be made. Sometimes he'd cook eggs or toast. We'd sit across from each other and talk about random things. News, movies, stupid stuff at first. Then it got deeper. He asked questions no one else was asking, not even my friends. Things like, "Do you think you stayed with him too long because you were afraid of starting over?" Or, "Did you ignore signs because you didn't want to be alone?" And the uncomfortable part was, he was right. I started opening up more than I intended to, telling him things I hadn't even admitted to myself, about how I felt stuck, about how I wasn't sure what I wanted anymore, about how embarrassing it felt to come crawling back home at my age. "You're not crawling," he said once. "You're regrouping." It sounds simple, but the way he said it made it feel true. Weeks went by like that. Quiet mornings, long conversations. My mom was around in the evenings, but she was always tired, and honestly, we'd never had that kind of connection. She loved me, I knew that, but we didn't talk about feelings. Not really. Richard did, and that's where things started getting complicated. It wasn't sudden. There wasn't a moment where everything flipped. It was gradual, almost invisible. The way he started looking at me when I talked, the way I noticed how his voice softened when he said my name, the way I started lingering in the kitchen longer than necessary, just to keep the conversation going. I told myself it was nothing, that I was just lonely, that he was just being kind. But then there were moments that didn't feel so innocent, like the time I was reaching for a glass in the cabinet and he stepped in to grab something at the same time. Our hands brushed, and instead of pulling away immediately, we both hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough to make my chest tighten. Or the night the power went out during a storm, and we ended up sitting in the living room with candles, talking for hours. My mom had already gone to bed, exhausted from a double shift. It was just the two of us, the sound of rain hitting the windows, shadows flickering across the walls. You ever feel like you ended up in a life you didn't choose? I asked him. He looked at the flame of the candle for a long moment before answering, more than I'd like to admit. There was something heavy in his voice, something unresolved. You love my mom? I asked, and even as the words left my mouth, I wasn't sure why I was asking. He didn't answer right away. I care about her, he said finally. It wasn't the same thing. I felt that answer settle somewhere deep in my chest, in a way I didn't fully understand at the time. After that night, I started noticing everything more. The way he moved around the house, the way his presence filled a room without him saying much, the quiet tension that seemed to exist just under the surface whenever we were alone together. And the worst part? I didn't pull away. If anything, I leaned into it. I'd catch myself choosing outfits I knew looked good, even though I had nowhere to go. I'd sit closer than necessary when we were watching TV. I'd laugh a little too hard at things that weren't that funny. I knew it was wrong, of course I did. But I also told myself it wasn't crossing any real lines. Nothing had actually happened. It was just energy, unspoken. Until the night everything changed. My mom picked up an extra shift and told us she wouldn't be home until late. I remember feeling that information land in my body before I even processed it mentally, like some part of me understood the implication before I consciously did. We ended up in the kitchen again, like always. He poured himself a drink this time instead of coffee. Whiskey, I think. He offered me one, and I said yes without hesitation. We talked about nothing and everything. The conversation flowed easily, like it always did, but there was something different in the air, something heavier. At one point, he said, "You don't have to go back to Chicago, you know." I frowned. I can't just stay here forever. Why not? Because this isn't my life. He looked at me in a way that made my stomach flip. Maybe it could be something else, he said. I didn't know how to respond to that. Or maybe I did, and I just didn't want to admit it.
The silence stretched between us. Not uncomfortable, just charged. And then he stepped closer. Not all the way, just enough. Close enough that I could see the lines on his face, the way his jaw tightened slightly, like he was holding something back. "You should go to bed," he said quietly. But neither of us moved, not right away. I should have gone to bed. That's the part I keep replaying in my head, even now. If I had just listened to that one sentence, if I had taken the out he was clearly giving me, none of what came after would have happened. Or at least that's what I tell myself when I can't sleep. But I didn't move. I stood there in the kitchen, close enough to him that I could smell the whiskey on his breath, mixed with that faint scent of aftershave he always wore. It wasn't overpowering, just enough to make everything feel more real, more immediate. "You're right," I said, but my voice didn't match the words. It came out softer than I intended, slower. He didn't step back, neither did I. The silence stretched, and it wasn't empty anymore. It felt like something was building inside it, something we both understood but weren't naming. "I don't think you want me to go to bed," I said, and the second it left my mouth, I felt this rush of heat crawl up my neck. Not embarrassment exactly, more like adrenaline. His eyes shifted slightly, like he was deciding whether to shut it down or let it continue. "You're playing with something you don't understand," he said. That should have been enough. That should have snapped me out of it. But instead, it pulled me in even more. "Then explain it to me," I said. There was a long pause. I could see it in his face, the internal fight. The line he knew was there, the one we were both standing right on top of, and then he crossed it. He reached out and touched my arm, lightly, barely even a touch, but it was intentional. That was the moment everything shifted from unspoken to real. I didn't pull away. If anything, I leaned into it. I remember thinking, this is happening. And instead of stopping it, I let it. His hand slid down slightly, from my arm to my wrist, and there was something steady about the way he held it. Not rushed, not uncertain. Like he'd already made the decision. "You should stop me," he said quietly. But the way he said it, it didn't sound like a command. It sounded like a warning he didn't expect me to follow. "I'm not going to," I said. And that was it. There wasn't some dramatic moment where we crashed into each other. It was slower than that, more deliberate, like we were both fully aware of every second as it unfolded. He stepped closer, closing the space between us completely this time. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I knew exactly how wrong it was. Every part of me knew. But there was also this other feeling, something reckless, something that didn't care about consequences, at least not in that moment. He lifted his hand to my face, hesitating just for a second before his fingers brushed against my cheek. "Last chance," he said. I shook my head. I don't even remember deciding to do it. I just did. I kissed him, and for a split second, he didn't move, like he was still holding on to that last thread of restraint. But then it snapped. He kissed me back. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't tentative. It felt like something that had been building for weeks, finally breaking through all at once. I should have stopped. I could have stopped, even then, but I didn't. We stumbled out of the kitchen, not even really paying attention to where we were going. Everything felt blurred around the edges, like the world had narrowed down to just the two of us. I remember my back hitting the wall in the hallway, his hands on me. The way my brain kept flashing warning signs that I kept ignoring. "This is your mom's husband." That thought hit me more than once, hard, but every time it did, I pushed it away. Because in that moment, he didn't feel like that. He just felt like a man who was looking at me like I was the only thing in the room. That's the part that messes with me the most. The way it didn't feel like a mistake while it was happening. It felt intentional, wanted, chosen. We made it to his bedroom, their bedroom. That should have stopped me. Seeing it, being in that space, the bed my mom slept in, the pictures on the dresser. But it didn't. If anything, it made everything feel more intense, more dangerous, and I leaned into that feeling instead of pulling away from it. I'm not going to go into every detail. I don't think I even could, not without losing my train of thought completely. But I remember enough. I remember the way he kept pausing, like he was giving me chances to stop it. And every time I didn't. I remember thinking, I'm choosing this. Not being forced, not being manipulated, choosing. That's something I've had to sit with ever since. It wasn't quick. It wasn't careless. It was deliberate. And that's what makes it harder to process now, because it wasn't just one bad decision. It was a series of them, one after another, each one pushing things further. At some point, I stopped thinking entirely. Everything just became physical, immediate. And then it was over, just like that. The silence afterward felt completely different from the one in the kitchen, heavier, real. I remember sitting there, trying to catch my breath, staring at nothing in particular while my brain slowly started to come back online. And when it did, everything hit me all at once. "What did we just do?" I said. He didn't answer right away. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, looking down at the floor. Finally, he said, "Something we can't undo." That's when the panic started creeping in. "This can't happen again," I said quickly, too quickly. Like if I said it fast enough, it would make it true. He nodded. "It won't." But there was something in his voice that didn't sound certain. I got dressed in a hurry, my hands shaking slightly. I didn't even look at him as I moved around the room. "I'm serious," I said. "This was a mistake." He looked up at me then, and there was something in his expression I couldn't quite read. "Was it?" he asked. That question hit harder than I expected, because I didn't have a clear answer. "Yes," I said anyway. "It has to be." He stood up slowly, not coming closer this time. "Then we treat it like one," he said. I nodded, even though my chest felt tight. "Okay." But as I walked out of that room and down the hallway, I already knew something wasn't right, because mistakes are supposed to feel wrong immediately, and part of me didn't feel that way. That part scared me more than anything. I went to my room and closed the door, leaning against it as my heart pounded. I kept expecting to feel overwhelming guilt, something that would snap me back into reality. And it was there, just not as strong as it should have been. Instead, there was this other feeling underneath it, something I didn't want to name. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes of what happened, felt it all over again. And the worst part, I knew it wasn't over. Even though we both said it was, I could feel it. The line had been crossed. And once something like that happens, you don't just go back to normal. You can pretend, you can try. But something changes. Something always changes. And I had no idea just how much everything was about to spiral.
The next morning felt like walking into a version of my life that didn't quite fit anymore. I woke up early, even though I barely slept. My body felt heavy, like I'd run a marathon the night before. But my mind was sharp in the worst way. Every thought was loud. Every memory was right there waiting for me the second I opened my eyes. For a few seconds, I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself it hadn't actually happened, that it was one of those hyper-realistic dreams that leaves you shaken but fades as the day goes on. But then I shifted slightly, and my body reminded me. It happened. There was no undoing it, no reframing it. No pretending it was something else. I sat up slowly, pressing my palms into my eyes like I could somehow push the memory out of my head. My heart was already racing, like it knew what the day was going to bring before I even got out of bed. I didn't want to see him. That was my first clear thought. Avoid him. Stay in my room.
Wait until my mom got home. Pretend nothing happened until I figured out how to actually deal with it. But life doesn't really work like that, especially not in a house where everything echoes and every movement feels noticed. I heard him in the kitchen, the sound of a cabinet opening, the coffee maker. Normal, everyday noises that suddenly felt loaded with meaning. I stayed in my room for almost an hour, just sitting there, scrolling on my phone without actually reading anything. My stomach was tight, like I might throw up if I stood up too fast. Eventually, I had to face it. I couldn't hide forever. I opened the door slowly, like I was stepping into something dangerous. The hallway looked exactly the same as it always did. Same pictures, same carpet, same light coming in through the window. But it didn't feel the same. Nothing did. When I walked into the kitchen, he was standing at the counter, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. 2. That detail hit me immediately. He glanced up when he heard me, but his expression didn't change much. Calm, controlled, like he'd already decided how this was going to go. "Morning," he said. Morning, like we hadn't completely destroyed the boundaries of our entire relationship just hours ago. "Morning," I replied, my voice tight. He slid one of the mugs toward me. "You'll need it." I hesitated for a second before taking it. My hand brushed against his again, and this time I pulled back immediately, like the contact burned. We stood there in silence for a few seconds, both sipping coffee, both clearly aware of everything we weren't saying. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "We need to talk about it," I said. He nodded once, like he'd been expecting that. "Yeah," he said, "we do." I set the mug down, my hand shaking slightly. "That can't happen again." "I know. You said that last night." And I meant it. I let out a short breath, trying to steady myself. "Okay, then we just move on. Pretend it didn't happen." He looked at me for a long moment, and there was something almost unreadable in his expression. "That's not how things like this work," he said. My chest tightened. "It has to be." "Does it?" "Yes," I snapped, louder than I intended. "It does, because the alternative is—" I trailed off, not even wanting to finish that sentence, because the alternative was something I wasn't ready to even think about. He didn't push it. He just nodded again, slower this time. "All right," he said. "We move on." But the way he said it didn't feel like agreement. It felt like postponement. The rest of the day was tense in a way I'd never experienced before. Every interaction felt forced. Every glance felt too long or too short. We tried to act normal. We failed. I spent most of the afternoon out of the house, just driving aimlessly, trying to clear my head. But it didn't help. If anything, being alone made it worse. There was nothing to distract me from my own thoughts. I kept replaying everything, not just the physical part, but the lead-up, the conversations, the looks, the moments I could have shut it down but didn't. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized something I didn't want to admit. It wasn't just him. I was part of it, fully. That realization sat heavy in my chest, like something I couldn't shake loose. When I got back home, my mom was already there. Sitting on the couch, she was kicked off, looking exhausted. "Hey, baby," she said, smiling when she saw me. I forced a smile back. "Hey, long day?" "Yeah, just drove around a bit." She nodded like she understood. Sometimes you need that. I felt a pang of guilt so sharp it almost made me flinch. She had no idea that just the night before, everything in her life had been quietly, completely altered. I glanced toward the kitchen. He was there, leaning against the counter, watching us. Not obviously, just enough that I noticed. And for a second, our eyes met. There was something there, something unspoken. And then it was gone. Dinner was painfully normal. Small talk, work stories, nothing that mattered. I barely tasted the food. Every time my mom spoke to him, every time she smiled at him, it felt like pressure building inside my chest, like I was sitting on top of a secret that could explode at any moment. After dinner, I went straight to my room again. I couldn't handle being around them together. I tried to distract myself with TV, but I kept losing focus. My thoughts kept drifting back to him, to what happened, to what it meant. And then around midnight, I heard a soft knock on my door. My entire body tensed. I knew who it was before I even moved. For a second, I considered pretending I was asleep. But I didn't. "Yeah," I called, my voice quieter than I intended. The door opened slowly, and he stepped inside, closing it behind him. "Your mom's asleep," he said. That shouldn't have mattered, but it did. "What are you doing?" I asked, even though I already knew. He didn't answer right away. He just stood there, looking at me in that same way that had started all of this. "We didn't finish the conversation," he said. "Yes, we did," I replied quickly. "We said it was a mistake." "And you believe that?" I hesitated.
That hesitation was everything. He took a step closer. "You've been thinking about it all day," he said. "I can tell." I swallowed hard. "So have you." "Yeah," he admitted. "I have." The room felt smaller all of a sudden, like the walls were closing in, pushing us closer together whether I wanted it or not. "This is a bad idea," I said, but there was no conviction behind it. "I know." "Then you should leave." He didn't move. "Tell me to go," he said. I just did. "No," he said softly. "You didn't." And the worst part was, he was right. Because if I really meant it, I would have stood up. I would have opened the door. I would have ended it right there. But I didn't. I just sat there, my heart pounding, my thoughts tangled, feeling that same pull I felt the night before. Stronger now, more dangerous. "Why are you here?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me for a long moment before answering. "Because I don't think that was a mistake," he said. That sentence landed like a spark in a room full of gasoline. Everything in me knew what the right response was. Everything. But I didn't say it. Instead, I just looked at him. And that was enough.
Because the second I didn't shut it down, the second I didn't push him away, we both knew exactly where this was going. And this time, it didn't feel like something that just happened. It felt like a decision. I wish I could say there was a moment where I snapped out of it. Some clear, defining second where everything came crashing down, and I finally saw the situation for what it was and stopped. That didn't happen. What actually happened was slower, quieter, way more dangerous than a single explosive mistake, because it turned into a pattern. That night, he didn't stay long. It wasn't like before. There was no confusion afterward, no sitting in silence trying to process what we'd done. This time, it felt understood, like we had crossed something together, and neither of us was pretending it hadn't happened anymore. When he left my room, he didn't say much, just looked at me for a second, like he was memorizing something, then walked out. And I didn't chase after him. I didn't cry. I didn't spiral. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling this mix of adrenaline and something darker, something heavier. Because now it wasn't an accident. Now it was a choice. And once something becomes a choice, it changes how you carry it. The days that followed settled into this strange, secret rhythm. On the surface, everything looked normal. My mom went to work. I applied to jobs I didn't care about. We had dinner together. We watched TV. But underneath all of that, there was this second layer to everything. Looks that lasted a second too long. Silences that weren't empty. Moments where we passed each other in the hallway and didn't touch, but both knew we wanted to. It didn't happen every day. That would have been too obvious, even to ourselves. But it happened enough that it stopped feeling shocking. And that's what scares me now when I think back on it. How quickly something so wrong can start to feel normal. I told myself a lot of things during that time. That it wasn't really about him being my mom's husband. That it was about connection, about being seen, about feeling something after months of feeling completely numb. I told myself he understood me in a way no one else did. And part of that was true. But the rest of it was just justification. Because the reality was simple, even if I tried to complicate it. I knew exactly what I was doing, and I kept doing it anyway. It went on for almost a month, a full month of living in that house, sitting across from my mom at dinner, listening to her talk about her day, while carrying this secret that sat between me and him like a loaded gun no one else could see. There were moments where I almost told her, not because I thought it would fix anything, just because the weight of it started to feel unbearable. Like one night, she was sitting next to me on the couch, half asleep, her head leaning against my shoulder. "You seem better," she mumbled. "I was worried about you when you first got here." That hit harder than anything else, because she meant it. She thought I was healing, that I was moving forward. And in a twisted way, I guess I looked like I was. I laughed more, I wasn't as withdrawn. But it wasn't because I was okay. It was because I was distracted by something I shouldn't have been part of in the first place. "You don't have to rush going back," she said softly. "Stay as long as you need." I remember swallowing hard, staring straight ahead at the TV. "Yeah," I said. "I know." I almost told her then. I almost turned my head and just said it, ripped it open, let everything fall apart the way it probably should have. But I didn't, because I was scared, not just of losing her, but of facing what I'd become in the process. The turning point came in a way I didn't expect. It wasn't some dramatic confrontation. It wasn't getting caught. It was a pregnancy test. I bought it without thinking too much about it, just a nagging feeling that had been building for a few days, a delay I couldn't ignore anymore. I told myself it was stress, that my body was just out of sync, but deep down, I already knew. I took the test in the bathroom, locking the door even though no one was home. I remember sitting on the edge of the tub, staring at the floor while I waited. My hands were cold. My whole body felt disconnected,
like I was watching myself from the outside. When I finally looked at it, I didn't react right away. 2 lines, clear as day. I just stared at it, like if I looked long enough, it might change. It didn't. And in that moment, everything that I'd been avoiding, everything I'd been pushing down, came rushing to the surface all at once. This wasn't just a secret anymore. This was something real, permanent, something that couldn't be hidden behind silence and stolen moments. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I don't know how long I stayed in that bathroom. It felt like hours, but it was probably minutes. Eventually, I stood up, still holding the test, and looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't recognize the person looking back at me, not because I looked different, but because I knew something about myself now that I couldn't unknow. I walked out of the bathroom slowly, my legs feeling unsteady. He was in the living room. Of course he was, sitting in that same recliner like everything was normal. I stood there for a second, just looking at him. "Richard," I said. He looked up, immediately noticing something was off. "What's wrong?" I didn't say anything. I just held out the test. It took him a second to understand what he was looking at. And when he did, I saw it. The shift. The calm, controlled version of him cracked for the first time since this started. "Are you serious?" he asked, his voice lower than I'd ever heard it. I nodded. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. The silence this time wasn't charged or tense. It was heavy, crushing. "What are you going to do?" he asked. The question felt almost unreal. "What am I going to do?" I repeated, my voice shaking. "What are we going to do?" He stood up slowly, running a hand over his face. This can't come out," he said. That sentence hit me like a slap. "Are you kidding me?" I said, disbelief flooding in. "That's your first thought?" "It has to be," he snapped, the edge in his voice sharper now. "Think about what this would do." "Oh, I am thinking about it," I shot back. "I've been thinking about it this whole time. You're just now catching up." He paced a few steps like he was trying to physically outrun the situation. "We need to be smart about this," he said. "Smart?" I laughed, but it came out hollow. That ship sailed a long time ago. He stopped, looking at me in a way that felt different now. Not the same intensity, not the same pull. This was something else. Fear. "You can't tell her," he said. There it was. Not, "We need to figure this out together." Not, "Are you okay?" Just that. "You can't tell her." Something inside me shifted in that moment, because for the first time since all of this started, I saw it clearly. This wasn't some deep connection. This wasn't something meaningful. It was selfish. It was reckless. And now that there were real consequences, he wasn't standing with me in it. He was trying to control it, to contain it. And suddenly, all those conversations, all those moments where I thought he understood me, they felt different, smaller. "You don't get to decide that," I said quietly. His jaw tightened.
"I'm trying to protect all of us." "No," I said, shaking my head. "You are trying to protect yourself." That landed. I could see it in his face. For a second, neither of us spoke. And then, I did something I should have done a long time ago. I stepped back. Physically, emotionally, all of it. "I'm not hiding this," I said. His expression hardened. "You'll destroy everything." I swallowed, my chest tight, but my voice steady. "It's already destroyed." And for the first time since this started, I actually meant what I was saying. Because the truth was, there was no version of this where things went back to normal. No version where we all just moved on. That was the illusion we'd been living in. And it was over. I turned and walked away from him, my heart pounding, but my mind clearer than it had been in weeks. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do next. I didn't know how my mom would react or what would happen after that. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to keep pretending. Not anymore.